Let's turn to Luke chapter 14. Have you ever found yourself in the wrong room, a place where you suddenly realise, actually, I don't belong here and in this meeting? Is that an uncomfortable feeling that anybody's experienced? Yes, I can. Yeah, I can remember in Fiji, I was attending, in my role as SOMA National Director, a meeting of all the Pacific Anglicans, and the Archbishop of Canterbury was visiting, and I was invited to be part of all of this reasonably high-level kind of meetings. And there was this particular meeting that Robert Kiriopa, the CEO of Anglican Missions, and I came into, and it turned out that there were cabinet ministers in that meeting. There were industry chiefs, and they were talking about aid and development and international finance. And about 10 minutes into the meeting, Robert turned to me, and we looked at each other, and he said, "I don't think we're meant to be in this meeting." So we quietly withdrew at the first possible break. No, it wasn't a meeting for us. We weren't quite high enough to be in that particular meeting. Maybe you've had that experience. You need to think of, in this reading today, this parable, of a very posh dinner party. Very posh dinner party. Think, I don't know, Downton Abbey or something like that, and around the table there are people there who belong there, and there's a very high and witty standard of behaviour and conversation, and you've got to do things just right, don't you? Grab the right piece of cutlery and all that kind of thing. And can you imagine how uncomfortable it would be for someone, I don't know, just come off the fields to be invited into that dining room? Well, keep holding on to that feeling. Now, the context of the parable that we've had read to us is, again, it is in a very high-class meal. We see the beginning of verse 14. Jesus was invited to the house of a leader of the Pharisees to eat a meal on the Sabbath. So, on the Sabbath, people would often put on a very special meal that, of course, had all been prepared the day before, because you can't work on the Sabbath, and invite people along. Now, at this meal, there were, I think, a lot of the top religious leaders, Pharisees and lawyers, the scribes were there. This was a high-level meeting, and I think Jesus was regarded as a high-level dinner guest. And there would be people who would come along because they'd heard that Jesus was going to this meeting. So just with those sort of Downton Abbey tensions in mind, the first thing that happens at this meal is that a sick person seems to be placed in front of Jesus, almost as some bait. What's he going to do on the Sabbath? Is he going to heal this person? We're going to catch him out. And indeed, he does. He takes the initiative and asks the question, is it lawful to cure people on the Sabbath? They can't respond to that. They can't say no. So he heals this man of what's called dropsy, or that is swelling, edema in the body. And so, and then he noticed, verse 7, how the guests chose the places of honour, and he told them a parable. This is like the small parable that leads up to the big parable. When you're invited by someone to the wedding banquet, do not sit in the place of honour, in case someone more distinguished than you comes in, and you have to give up their place for them. And that's a great lesson, a lesson in humility and in knowing your place. And then and he says, therefore, after that, to the actual host, and this is pretty rude, pretty direct. He says to the host, When you give a luncheon or a dinner, do not invite your friends or brothers or relatives or rich neighbours in case they might invite you in return and you would be repaid. Instead, when you give a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame. You will be blessed because they cannot repay you. You will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous. That's pretty strong and pretty direct, isn't it? And it's a criticism of the meal that he is a guest in, and a criticism of his host. Some interesting things in there. It talks about the resurrection of the righteous, clearly something in normal Pharisaical Jewish theology, that was something that was looked forward to. And then in verse 15, one of the dinner guests responds to that about the resurrection of the righteous. Blessed is anyone who will eat bread in the kingdom of God. And he's referring at that point to that great wedding feast, that great banquet that is to come. And here's a picture of what we think it might look like. Come, this great banquet, come, for all is ready. Now, before we dig into this parable, which has a similar, clearly connected equivalent in Matthew chapter 22, at which point it says that the meal is a wedding banquet that a king gives for his son. Let's look at the cultural background, what we understand about meals. First of all, you need to understand that when it's a big important feast that is given, there are two invitations. The first one goes out well ahead of time, and then you say, yes, I will come. Think of a wedding reception, and you want to know the exact number of people there for catering purposes. It's just the same. You need to know what kind of animal you need to kill and how many of them, and then it takes a while to cook and all of that, and then when the meal is actually ready, and not until it's ready, and there's no 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, it's not like that. When it's actually ready, the second invitation goes out that says the meal is ready, come. And then you come. So that's normally how things would work for a special feast. Now, let's think also of what the dining room might look like. It doesn't look like the other table in the previous picture. It looks more like this. If you were wealthy and you were putting on a special meal, this is how people dined on a triclinium. There's 3 of them there, and each one of them is big enough for 3 people to lie and then take food off a central table. And so a big room would have sets of 3 in these U-shaped meals and dining setups. And there's a strict protocol about who sat where. The most important person, the host, would be at the centre of the one at the back. And then the most important guest would be just next to that person on their right. The next most important person would be on the couch to the left, in the middle. And the next most important, the one on the right, in the middle. There's a very clear protocol about this, and that was sort of replicated with the lesser tables and setups around the room. So you can see what Jesus says about taking the place of honour. If you just turned up to that feast and you decided, right, I'm going to be in the middle at the back, oh no. No. You don't do anything like that. That would be a very dishonourable thing to do. Now, with this picture in mind, let's also recall that this culture in which this parable is being told, and in which Jesus, in fact, all of the Bible is produced, is in what you could call an honour and shame culture. Honour and shame. They're the opposite of each other, and being honoured is very important. To be shamed is a terrible thing. You've heard about honour killings. Well, that's because it's such a terrible thing to be dishonoured in a certain way, maybe by someone in your family, that to preserve your honour, they have to lose their life. This is how serious honour and shame is taken. And with that lens, we can now look at the parable. But Just before we do, we need to go to a biblical background, a prophecy that is in the background and would be in the minds of the people at this particular banquet. Here it is, Isaiah chapter 25. On this mountain, the prophet Isaiah says, the Lord of hosts will make for all peoples, note that, all peoples, all nations, a feast of rich food, a feast of well-aged wines, rich food filled with marrow, well-aged wines strained clear. And he will destroy on this mountain the shroud that is cast over all peoples, the covering that is spread over all nations. He will swallow up death forever. Then the Lord will wipe away the tears from all faces, and the disgrace, we've talked about shame, the disgrace of his people, he will take away from all the earth, for the Lord has spoken. This is what is to come when the kingdom of God is on earth, when the veil between earth and heaven is removed and everything is made new. There's so many things in this prophecy that are picked up in the New Testament and in the revelation of what is to come. This is a very important prophecy. And if we connect that with what we learnt last week about the cedar tree on Mount Zion, this is more of what is to come. This is more as what is fulfilled by the Messiah, Jesus. So if we come back to the parable itself, let's take a look here at the first part. Jesus is saying now in response to the dinner guest who very piously talks about how blessed it is to be at this great feast, and he certainly would have had in mind that feast referred to in Isaiah 25. Jesus says, someone gave a great dinner and invited many. The time for the dinner, he sent out his slave to say to those who'd been invited, come, for everything is ready. That's the second invitation. It means the food is now cooked, everything is ready, so come, just come. You said you're coming, now we will enjoy this wonderful feast. And so, verse 18, but they all alike began to make excuses. The first said, I've got a piece of land, I must go out and see it, please accept my regrets. Another said, I've got 5 yoke of oxen, I'm going to try them out, please accept my regrets. Another said, I've just been married, and therefore I cannot come. Now at this point we could sing together a little Sunday school ditty from a few decades back, but you might note I did not include it in the worship songs today. I cannot come, I cannot come. Okay, that's right. Well, let's just leave that there. But let's look at the excuses. I mean, they're significant things, buying land, buying oxen and getting married. They could well be good reasons that you cannot come. The problem is you've already said that you will come. You have said that you will come. And when you go into the excuses themselves, look, I brought a piece of land and now I must go and see it. Who buys land sight unseen? That's just ridiculous. You think of a village kind of environment, you'd just know the land. You would have grown up with an awareness of that land, probably. Nobody does that. It's such a blatant fabrication. It's just disrespectful of the host of the meal. You've said you'll come, but you don't want to come, and you can't even be honest about it. That is seriously dishonoring. Then the 5 yoke of oxen. I'm going to try them out. Now, in my research for this, apparently there were test out the oxen paddocks that people were, if they're getting from the market, tie them up, yoke them together. Are they going to work together, these ones? And that's what you do. This is a little bit like someone phoning home his wife and saying, hey, look, I've bought 5 cars. I can't come to our special meal tonight because I'm now going to go and test out these cars. Whoever does that? Well, if you buy it on Trade Me in another city, maybe. And only if it's a Toyota, but yeah, I have done that before, yeah. Another just blatant fabrication. And again, dishonouring. Please accept my regrets. And then the one who's just got married and you cannot come. Were you married the day before? Why can't you come? Why can't you come? And if you've just been married, well, wasn't it a wonderful place to introduce your wife to the social scene of our village? And no, there isn't even an apology or any sense of regret for the third one. I cannot come. Now, can you imagine hearing this parable at this posh dinner party that Jesus is telling it at? Just how scandalizing this would be, that people would do this in an honour-shame culture. It's very, very serious insult. And then look at verse 18. They all began to make excuses. We've just seen 3 of them. Everybody made an excuse. Can you imagine how you would feel as the host of that important thing? And maybe it was your son's wedding. It doesn't say that in this version of it. That's pretty bad, isn't it? Pretty bad. Okay, how will the host respond? So the slave returns and reports this to his master. The owner of the house becomes angry. Yep, I can get that. There's every right to be angry. And so now, go out at once into the streets and the lanes of the town and bring in the poor, the crippled, the blind, and the lame. And the slave said, Sir, what you ordered has done, and there is still room. There are still places for this banquet. There's still food. The people who are invited were not on the original guest list. And the information we have about them suggests that they're the people you wouldn't choose to invite to a special meal. They wouldn't be in the dining room at Downton Abbey. The poor, the crippled, the blind. These are the people with nowhere to go or no decent place to go. They're out on the streets begging, basically. But in contrast to the next group of people, they actually belong to that community. That's their home village or whatever it is. And so the master says, go out and invite more. Now this time you're going into the roads and the lanes. Now the roads are different from the streets. These are the roads, the highways outside the boundaries of the village. These are people who don't belong here. And the lanes, the idea almost is like the people who are sleeping in the hedges. These are people who are vagrants. They have no rights, no place to go eventually home to. Their situation is dire. And compel those people to come in so that my house will be filled. Now the word for compel is interesting. Why would they need to be compelled to come in, these people? Now, once again, we're in an honour-shame culture, but also a culture where hospitality is highly, highly valued and expected. That if someone comes to your house, you expect to invite them in and share a meal with them. The guest would expect an invitation, and the host would certainly expect to offer that invitation. But sometimes, because if the host is poor, the recipient of the invitation would politely say no, and maybe spend 5 or 10 minutes saying no, just in case the person is doing this out of social obligation and they can't really afford it or they don't really want to do it. And so that gives the inviting host a gracious way out. And you see this in a little sense in Luke chapter 24 on the road to Emmaus, where Jesus is walking with these couple, and then they invite them into their house. And what does Jesus say? Or what does Jesus do? He pretends to carry on walking. He doesn't immediately accept the invitation. So they repeat the invitation. They have to insist. And eventually he goes in and wonderful things happen at a meal. And so these people, if you imagine you had no rights, you didn't belong to that community, you looked terrible, and someone came and said, come to this banquet. You would think, me? Why am I being invited? I've got no rights to be here. So these people had to be compelled to come. Yes, you really are invited to this banquet. You really are. And what mattered to the master, verse 23, was so that my house would be filled. I tell you that none of those who were invited will taste my dinner. Now, there's things that we can take from this, little details that we can look at, and very briefly, first of all, the idea to compel people to come has been misused by the church in earlier centuries in crusades, the Spanish Inquisition. We must force people to become Christians. That's not what it means in here. That's not what's been talked about. It's for people who do not believe themselves to belong, do not believe themselves to be worthy in such a wonderful setting, worthy of an invitation to banquet with the King. They need to be compelled. Generally, when we look at this, if we try to say, all right then, outside of the parable, who are these people? What groups is Jesus referring to? The original invitees are seen as Israel, who had an invitation to be at the Messiah's banquet, but refused to come. When the invitation came, when the Messiah actually came, if they reject the Messiah, they've rejected their invitation. And then the next group of people to be invited were the rejected people of Israel, the poor people, the ones who maybe don't turn up at synagogue every Sunday, the ones who are ritually impure. That, yes, this is for them too. They have a place at this wonderful Isaiah chapter 25 feast. And then the third group are seen as the non-Israelites from outside the boundaries. They're seen as the Gentiles, the nations that we see from the prophecy will be at that great messianic feast. There's an invitation that goes out to them too. And note, it's interesting that in the parable we do not see the fulfillment of that invitation. We see the poor and the blind and the maimed come in, but we don't see the others come in. Because at the time that Jesus is saying it, it's not being fulfilled, is it? That's something to come. That's something that the church is now doing, where the nations are being invited in to Jesus' feast. And we can see in verses 23 and 24 that it slips out from the world of the parable, the voice of the one speaking becomes not so much the master but the person telling the parable, so that my house may be filled. This is Jesus the Messiah speaking now. And I tell you that none who were invited will taste my dinner. That is the Messiah's dinner. This is Jesus who is now speaking these strong words to these fine religious people. And so, there we have it. Can you imagine the temperature in the room? Can you imagine how people would have reacted to a story like that? Yes. No wonder they wanted to get rid of him after a story like that. But what a picture! What a picture of what God is doing and the invitation that goes out. So what can we take from this? What can we learn? Well, there's a lot in it. But first of all, is that the invitation, God's invitation to come to his feast, is a universal invitation. It does include everyone. Yes, different orders, different timings, but the invitation is for everyone to come. But whether you come or not comes down to your choice. Do you accept the second invitation that now is the time and actually come? It's one thing to believe in God. It's another thing to actually choose to come and to commit your life to him. There are many people who might say, Lord, Lord, or certainly believe, but do they do anything about it? Does anything change in the priorities of their life? People who don't respond to the now is the time come essentially exclude themselves from the feast. The choice is up to us. It also tells us that we should let nothing, property, oxen, cars, even family, nothing is more important than answering the call of God to come to the Messiah's feast. It's a parable about priorities. It's not just that. But it does speak to priorities and things of life that we can place in front of the things of God and what it costs. The exclusion that will result from wrong priorities and refusing the second invitation. It's a serious warning. And then, finally, the unfulfilled instruction of the master to compel the people to come in. These are the unworthies, the beyond the boundaries people. This is the nations who in the prophecy need to be around the table. It is the task of the church to complete the invitation process. It's the task of our church to compel the people to come in. The people who believe themselves to be not worthy, not in the right room. I've done the wrong things. No, I've made the wrong choices. How could I be invited to a feast like that? They need compelling. Not just a simple invitation, but a compelling. Yes, it is you. You have not been forgotten. You are desired. Please come. It's the task of evangelism, the task of all of us, the task of the church, to convince people that unworthy though they are invited. This is the task of the church. So come to the banquet. The feast is laid. Come. Let us pray.